When it comes to character strength in Super Smash Bros., people could argue all day long, and trust me, I've seen it, you do. But when it comes to the question of who's the best character in each game, there's actually a surprising amount of consensus. At this point, all 5 of the mainline Smash games have #1 characters that are, if not universally agreed upon, pretty dang close. Smash 64 Pikachu, Melee Fox, Brawl Meta Knight, Smash 4 Bayonetta, and Ultimate Steve. These 5 characters have all reigned on the top of the tier list for their respective games for at least the last few years, and in some cases, much longer. So today, I'm gonna rank these titans of Smash. After considering the numbers and the tape, I've split them into 3 different groups: the pretenders, the contenders, and the one true GOAT. Thank you to Asphalt Legends, who is paid to be mentioned in today's video. Asphalt Legends is a free-to-download arcade racing game, available on PS5, PS4, Xbox, PC, Nintendo Switch, and mobile, and this may be one of the easier sponsor pitches I've ever gotten. Reason being is they put Pac-Man in the game, which is an arcade game inside of an arcade racing game, which I just think kinda rocks. So the game mode is called Hunter Collector Mode, and it plays almost exactly like Pac-Man. So you collect Pac Dots across the track while ghost cars chase you down, but when you eat a power pellet, everything flips on its head. Your car turns yellow, and the ghosts that were chasing you turn and flee, and for 5 seconds you now become the hunter, chaining takedowns for bonus scores right down to the classic arcade blink when the hunter state is about to end. The Pac-Man event is live right now through September 15th, and you won't want to miss out on it. And like I said before, the game is completely free to play on pretty much any device, so if you're interested, you can use my code for a free in-game bonus. Thank you again to Asphalt Legends for supporting the channel. I hope you try out their new Pac-Man game mode, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Alright, so maybe Pretenders is unnecessarily inflammatory, but I think you get the picture. As great as 64 Pikachu and Melee Fox were, and as much as they define the metagames of their respective entries, they're simply too competitively healthy. But first, let's run down what actually makes them great. Pikachu was really the prototype of what's become a standard for top tiers in Smash. There's usually at least one great character in each game that checks all of these boxes. They're small, fast, have attacks with deceptively good range, and have a great recovery. This could also describe Melee Fox, Brawl Meta Knight, Smash 4 Diddy Kong, Ultimate Joker, and plenty of other characters, but you get what I mean. Pikachu's recovery alone makes him stand out in a game where a lot of up specials are quite frankly pathetic. Pikachu is certainly the only character in the game who's going to be recovering from all the way down here? Yeah, he'll make it back from that. It's not just the length that makes his recovery great though, it's the way that his choice of quick attack angles forces the opponent to respect way more options than simply going to the ledge. Dreamland's platforms, relevant because Dreamland is 64's only legal competitive stage, give Pikachu a ton of ways to mix up his recovery, and he has a good enough airspeed that he can usually just use his double jump to get close enough to the stage to force his opponents to respect those options. By the way, that up special is also one of Smash 64's best defensive options on stage because it grants frame 1 invincibility. There are a few frame 1 options in Smash 64, like surprisingly the Mario Bros. Tornadoes, but Pikachu's up B granting both invincibility and movement gives it extremely strong defensive utility. It's a unique escape option from certain scenarios where a grab or tech chase would be guaranteed on other characters. 64's Pikachu also has some of the best hitboxes in the game, like hands down. Take his back air. The thing is decently fast, but what really sets it apart is this like disturbing hitbox. The animation doesn't really do it justice at all because take a look at it in Smash 64's hitbox viewer. That's gross. I'd get that out of my face. When Pika back airs, the hitbox isn't just that little foot. It is that whole box surrounding it. You would think that a character like Pikachu's whole weakness would be that he has stubby little limbs, right? Well, thanks to hitboxes like back air and forward air that stick out well beyond the actual character model, Pikachu doesn't even have to have that problem. He can go air to air against characters that you would think would easily outpoke him. Also, by the way, Pikachu has some really potent combos, mostly juggles off of both his up tilt and up smash, and even if his combos don't kill, he can reliably end any of his other aerials and finish by sending the opponent off stage. What really sets him apart in a game known for long combos though, is that his recovery allows him to threaten to go super deep off stage for edge guards and turn those offstage situations into stocks. Fox rules the roost similarly in Melee by being a fast little guy running around and throwing out deceptively big aerials. He's also got not a frame 1 invincible special, although that's about where the similarities between 64's quick attack and melee Shine end. Shine, or Fox's reflector, is quite literally melee's Swiss Army knife. It is useful in just about every phase of the game. A combo starter, a combo filler, edgeguard tool, aerial stall, reflector, pretty much anything you want it to do, it will do it for you, and it'll do it really, really freaking good. Fox has the ability to bring you off stage and then end your stock with Shine, or he can just blow you out of the water with his insane combo game, where it seems like he can go into whatever he wants off of fast, low-risk combo starters like neutral air, up tilt, and of course, Shine. He has an incredibly threatening dash dance and ridiculous burst potential. But although Fox has been far and away the most represented character late in tournament brackets since 2014, the true promised land of 20XX never really truly arrived. Fox has stabilized at representing between 25 to 30% of top major tournament placements, according to research done by Easy Freezy. In most years, Fox has a little bit more than placement shares of number 2 and number 3 combined, which are Sheik and Falco. Now, don't get me wrong, Fox is the best character in Melee right now, and by a pretty significant margin, but his meta presence doesn't overshadow that of the rest of the field. I don't really know what the 20XX equivalent for Pikachu would be, but we pretty much saw it in the mid-2010s. Just look at this run of major winners and the characters they used in bracket. Yeah, Pikachu actually won every single North American tournament for nearly a 2-year span and lost just one in Japan. It got to the point where even some Pikachu mains were saying, we might need to ban this guy, which is insane. But in the end, ban discussions fizzled out because as the meta continued to evolve, 2 natural predators emerged, or at least 2 characters with strong enough counterplay to make things competitive. Captain Falcon and, surprisingly, Yoshi. Captain Falcon has great range and speed and enough explosiveness in his combo game to keep things competitive despite how hard he gets edgeguarded by the rat. And the reason I said surprisingly for Yoshi is that I would assume a lot of people who aren't super familiar with 64 would think Kirby, but Yoshi's unique shield mechanics give him invincibility for a few frames, similar to Melee but with an even smaller window, which allows him to essentially parry by pressing in that small window before getting attacked. Yoshi can then counterattack, usually with one of his quick aerials, and he's more than capable of turning those hits into stocks even at early percents. These days though, Pikachu is still considered the best character in the game, but Kirby, Yoshi, and even Captain Falcon are all considered threats to win major tournaments. He's certainly come down to earth a little bit over the past decade. And those are the qualities of what makes these 2 characters, in my opinion, the pretenders, if only when it comes to being the best Smash characters of all time. There's just a little too much counterplay in their metas, too many characters that can win majors over them, and too many characters that don't fold merely at the sight of them. Yes, I know that it's only 2 characters in Smash 64, but that's out of 11 possible, which is a pretty decent chunk of the cast. So for my opinion, how do I rank these 2 against each other? Well, for me, it comes down to the fact that Pikachu was actually good enough to get some earnest ban discussions going during that period where he was winning quite literally everything under the sun in the mid-2010s. Fox hasn't really had anything quite like that, and if anything, rules discussions end up orienting around characters like Jigglypuff or Ice Climbers instead. Cody Schwab was the first Fox solo main to be the best player in the world, and that took 20 years of Melee for that to finally be a possibility. Fox is probably just too threatened by not just his fellow top tiers, but also by weirdo mid tiers like Donkey Kong and nowadays Luigi. There you go, I did it again. But does Fox have the tools to win all those matchups? Yeah, 100%, absolutely. He's the best character in the game, like no duh. But part of what makes him such a healthy top tier is that Fox is deeply susceptible to early deaths, especially when he's piloted by players with maybe poor or inexperienced defense. That's more true against some characters than others, I'm looking at you, Gorilla, but it means the Fox players have to play on point to stay alive for long enough to actually make those busted tools count. Pikachu, meanwhile, may lack some of the explosiveness of Fox. His frame 1 invincible special doesn't combo you into death after all, but he makes up for it and more with how incredible his defense and recovery options are in a game that infamously lacks them. And for that reason, even as a Melee guy, this kind of hurts me, but my ranking starts with Fox at number 5 and Pikachu at number 4. Okay, so I know I said 3 groups, but like it would kind of be spoilers if I didn't talk about all 3 of the remaining characters at once. Smash really started to expand in the post-Melee days. Brawl introduced third-party characters, Smash 4 introduced DLC, and Ultimate just said, "Get everyone is here," and added even more, including Steve and Sora, and that's like Disney, what is that? Even though there were 38 playable characters in Brawl, the number 1 was clear from day one. Meta Knight is just that guy. I've already talked about how this archetype of small and fast characters have proven to be really strong throughout Smash history. Well, now they gave him a sword. and a tornado. This move is an absolute war crime. It was responsible for the most enduring image from Brawl's competitive history. 4 of the greatest players in the world, all picking Meta Knight and all independently going for mock tornado. This is just throw my hands up in the air, man. That's cinema. Meta Knight has a strong kit across the board though. He had a nigh uninteractable recovery that allowed him to recover from and to pretty much any point on the screen. That up special was also an extremely strong kill move if it wasn't enough, with an angle that put lots of characters in a position where they couldn't recover even if they didn't go all the way into the blast zone. He had lightning fast frame data, I mean seriously, just look at this up air, and remember, this was the slow pace Smash game of the series. Meta Knight apparently didn't get the memo, and it should be no surprise that the character that can do this while everybody is seemingly running through the molasses is the best character in the game. Oh, and tripping, by the way, you can't trip when you're mashing that up air or gliding through the air, so honestly, Meta Knight didn't really mind that that was a thing. There was only one character that ever threatened Meta Knight's position atop the tier list in any real way, which was surprisingly the Ice Climbers. As their meta developed and handoff combos became more and more potent, there were a few players who thought Ice Climbers were either better or more toxic, if not both. They could pretty reliably kill off a single grab towards the endgame days of Brawl, but that never really materialized in terms of tournament results, nor in terms of community sentiment. Meta Knight was the #1 ranked character on all 8 official tier lists, spanning from September of 2008 through April of 2013. Of the 2 lists that had voting data, both saw Meta Knight with a perfect score, meaning he received first place rankings from every single possible voter. There was a brief period where people thought Bayonetta might be a simple high tier in Smash 4. These were the days following patch 1.1.6, by the way, the last competitively relevant patch for Smash 4. That patch brought Bayonetta down to earth, or so some people seem to think at least. In the second official Smash 4 tier list, the first one being released following Bayonetta's release as DLC, she was ranked just 11th. In the previous patch, Bayonetta players had been running wild, hitting people with some truly insane and inescapable 0 to death combos. The patch made Bayonetta's multi-hits much easier to escape using SDI, which is a technique where you basically wiggle the stick to get multiple directional inputs while getting hit, each of which will push you further in whatever direction you are repeatedly inputting. In theory, these changes would let players escape the combos by forcing their way either too high or too low for Bayonetta to continue her combo routes. In theory, at least. Because it didn't work. In practice, what happened was that even with good SDI, Bayonetta usually had an option to continue her combo. Certain egregious routes where somebody got hit with a single downward afterburner kick and they just exploded off the top were mostly gone in the post-patch world, but Bayonetta players developed counterplay to the counterplay, and pretty soon we're back to hitting 0 to deaths on streams with regularity. But it's not just that this character was explosive. Donkey Kong could also kill you off of like 3 interactions in Smaforsh and was a mid-tier at best. Bayonetta also had incredible defense as well as ridiculous safety to her approach options. She loved playing at the ledge because moves like up B and side B could clip a character attempting to ledge trap and then she'd fly them to the moon. She had one of the best out of shield options in the game in up B, which again was a potential 0 to death starter. She had one of the most uniquely safe on shield aerials in her forward air, which would cause her to safely bounce off shields while maintaining potential pressure. Like, this was crazy. There were 2 more tier lists released throughout Smash 4's lifespan, and Bayonetta was atop both of them, although she was contested at the top by the likes of Diddy Kong on tier list number 3 and Cloud on tier list number 4. Surely it won't happen again though, right? Surely Nintendo won't release a blatantly broken downloadable character that totally takes over the metagame, right? Minecraft Steve's toolkit is just so distinct from anything that we have ever seen in Smash. Attributes-wise, he seems like he should be bad. Characters with movement stats as bad as Steve, one of the slowest characters in terms of both walk/dash speed and airspeed, are rarely top tiers, which is why it's not too hard to dig up some freezing cold takes from people calling him mid-tier not long after his release. It didn't really help that he released mid-pandemic and that most of the players who had picked him up prior to the return of offline play weren't previously known names, but not long after the return to offline play in 2021, Steve made it known that he was absolutely a problem. Some players discovered it was really, like, absurdly strong to just build block walls, hide behind them, and mine resources until you could exploit the insane value of Steve's diamond tools, which were basically the equivalent of if all of his normal moves had the same buff that fully charging a smash attack gives, by the way, so that's nuts. Other players were discovering that Steve had some truly insane, albeit rather difficult combos that took advantage of his ability ability to build blocks and laglessly land on them to extend openings. Others were discovering the absolutely wild strength of Footstool out of shield, an insanely fast option that comboed into his ridiculously strong down air, basically meaning that touching Steve's shield past 100% meant death, and even earlier for lighter characters. Now, don't be too surprised by this, but this is actually far from a definitive list of reasons why Steve ascended to number 1. It felt like every day Steve was getting a buff through this or that technique or strategy becoming developed or further exploited. But by the time a first official tier list for Ultimate was released in 2023, compiled through votes cast by ranked players, there was Steve at number 1, although it was competitive, with Aegis and Joker coming up not far behind. By the time the second tier list dropped in 2024, the meta was coalescing around 2 characters. Aegis and Joker had dropped down to merely top 10 status, while Steve held on to the number 1 slot just above Sonic, where 9 out of 63 voters ranked Sonic over Steve. Steve was still number 1 on the third and most recent tier list as of this video, and he actually received an even lower proportion of number 1 votes than on the previous tier list. This time, it was Kazuya as well as Sonic siphoning away the number 1 votes. But Steve was still by far the most voted as number 1 and remains on top. But what about tournament performance for these characters? And this is the part where it gets a little bit tricky. When you look at things on a raw level, Bayonetta and Steve actually pale in comparison to the dominance of Fox and Pikachu. Bayonetta peaked at 13.6% of late bracket placements in the final days of Smash 4, the time between the end of the final PGR season in summer 2018 and Ultimate's release that December. That's only about half of where Fox has been sitting over the past few years. But yeah, there's that elephant-sized roster-sized elephant, maybe? Whatever. There's an elephant-sized roster in the room. Both Smash 4 and Ultimate have at least double the roster size of Melee and quadruple the roster size of Smash 64, and the lower tiers, especially in Ultimate, are stronger in a vacuum than they are in Melee. Adjusting for Smash 4's roster being about double the size of Melee's, Smaforce's Bayonetta's peak dominance is actually pretty similar to that of Melee Fox's. 7.64 times the average play rate for Fox in 2024, the most recent year of Easy Freezy's dataset, versus 7.34 times the average play rate for Bayonetta. Steve, meanwhile, peaked at a 6.46 placement percentage in Ultimate in the first half of 2025. His placement percentage dropped to 5.68 in the second half of the year, but even taking the higher of the two numbers, Steve's play rate only sits at 5.30 times the average, about 2 points less than both Bayonetta and Fox. For an even more optimistic view of Steve, we could use Liquipedia's play rate data. Their data tends to select for top-level play as sets with recorded characters, usually coming from later in bracket, so it should be a pretty good analog. They have Steve at a 6.9% nice play rate, which still only comes out to 5.66 times the average. Even accounting for the size of Ultimate's roster, Steve has yet to dominate brackets in a similar way to Bayonetta and Fox. But maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. Steve isn't just frustrating because he's winning, Steve is frustrating because of how he's winning. He has a toolkit that both encourages disengagement while also encouraging resource farming. He can create stage hazards in ways that straight up invalidate certain characters' recoveries. He and Melee Fox can both feel unfair at times, but I guess at least it still feels like you're playing Smash against Melee Fox. Steve is a pretty inescapable part of top-level Smash at this point, which makes his impact feel even bigger. He's won 7 of the 19 majors so far this year as of this recording, a 36.8% win rate that would be pretty good even if the game didn't have like a billion characters. The fact that those 7 majors have been won by 4 different players, by the way, which were Carmelo, Akola, Mia, and Syrup, only makes him feel that much more ubiquitous. This is what clearly pushes him above Fox and Pikachu in my opinion. He feels similarly inescapable in a game multiple times bigger than theirs, and that just probably shouldn't happen. But, and maybe this is a hot take, I don't really think he's quite omnipresent enough to go beyond number 3, at least not yet. There's still time, as we're still waiting on that sweet Smash 6 announcement. Steve could develop into even more of a meta threat, but he doesn't quite really reach Bayonetta's level of meta saturation. 9 of the last 15 Smash 4 majors were won by that character, and she was used by the second place finisher 7 times. I don't really know if roster size is enough to push Steve over the top here in my opinion. Smash 4 had some other absolutely egregious top tiers like Cloud, Karin, Mewtwo, and Ryu, to name a few, who were all extremely strong, and yet Bayonetta stood tall above them all. Okay, so if you know Smash, you knew that it was about to come to this. It is time to talk about Meta Knight's tournament success. From 2008 through 2014, Liquipedia has a record of 38 major tournaments that took place across the world. Meta Knight won in 18 of them. Now, to be fair, many of those winners used secondary characters, but Meta Knight also finished second 16 times. So nearly half of all of the Grand Finals participants used Meta Knight on their way there in the Brawl era. Meta Knight had a 26.8% placement percentage across Brawl's lifespan, according to Easy Freezy, looking at top placements at all major events. That's just slightly below what Fox accomplishes on a yearly basis in Melee these days, and that's in a game featuring 12 more characters. Now remember, Fox and Bayonetta had placement percentages that were around 7.5 times the average. For Meta Knight, it was a clean 10.2 times. Meta Knight is also the closest any character ever came to being banned globally or even nationally. They even developed a stage clause just for him. Meta Knight players at many tournaments were simply not allowed to counterpick stages. Even if their opponent won the previous game, the opponent was still allowed to pick the stage for the next game. That is, unless it was a Meta Knight Ditto, in which picks went as usual. I don't know if this video is actually going to be public by the time this tournament happens, but they are actually planning to try this same stage clause with Steve at Supernova this year, for the record. This definitely doesn't mean that Steve is on Meta Knight's level. He's still my number 3 personally behind Bayonetta, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth attempting to level the playing field, even if it remains to be seen just how much of an impact it'll actually have. And yes, if you've put this together by process of elimination, that means that the one true GOAT of Super Smash Bros. Is none other than Brawl Meta Knight. Meta Knight was truly playing a different game out there with one of the craziest kits a platform fighter has ever seen. He had the recovery, the kill power, the frame data, whatever you could ask for. He earned a tier of his own, the prestigious double S tier, for a reason. He dominated the competitive scene like no other character has, before or since, and for everyone's sake, let's just hope it stays that way for whenever a Smash 6 does happen to roll around. Thanks for watching. Hey, it's turndownforALT, your favorite host of turndownforALT. I'm the only host. But anyway, if you want to watch awesome Smash videos and exclusive Walt clips, just make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Okay, that's it. Bye-bye. Big thanks to my top tier patrons and YouTube members. You can check those links out if you feel like supporting the channel and you more importantly have the disposable income to do so. Thank you to Avishua Stein, Bobby Wasabi, Brent Mukai, Carter Roberts, Kaiden, Dark Genix, Eric is Cool, Gustavo Cantu Fernandez, James Fabman, Jonah Witowski, Justin Duncan Mills, Kyle Carlin, Marshall Bradley, Michael Talamo, Prakar Sinha, Rosewood, and Sam Wright.